He was the smartest person in the room. Everyone knew it. He knew it, his colleagues knew it, his managers knew it. He had spent 20 years being the person others brought their hardest problems to because he could see angles they couldn't, process variables they hadn't considered, arrive at conclusions that seemed obvious only in retrospect. He did not make impulsive decisions. He did not act without thinking. And yet, in the most important moment of his professional life, under the pressure of a single high-stakes decision that needed to be made quickly, he got it catastrophically wrong. Not because he panicked, not because he stopped thinking, because he thought too much, too fast, in exactly the wrong direction. The decision cost him the thing he had spent 20 years building. Afterward, when the pressure was gone and the clarity of hindsight arrived, he could see every error with perfect precision. He could identify exactly where his reasoning had gone wrong, exactly which variable he had overweighted, exactly the moment where his confidence in his own analysis had closed the door on information that should have changed his conclusion. The intelligence that had served him so well for 20 years had, under pressure, become the instrument of his worst decision. His friends said he just panicked. But that wasn't it. What actually happened, the neurological level, is something far more specific and far more disturbing, because it doesn't just explain what happened to him. It explains what happens to every highly intelligent person the moment pressure enters the room. Welcome to Dr. Cole's Dark Psychology. I'm Dr. Evan Cole, behavioral psychologist and behavioral analyst. On this channel, we examine human behavior at the level it actually operates, not the choices people make, the neurological mechanisms that produce those choices when the conditions are right. Today, we are examining one of the most counterintuitive findings in all of cognitive science. Why smart people, specifically smart people, make worse decisions under pressure than people of average intelligence. Not sometimes, not occasionally, predictably, measurably, with a mechanism that has been documented, replicated, and studied for decades, and that almost nobody in the general population has ever heard explained. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why intelligence becomes a liability under pressure and what that means for every high-stakes decision you will ever face. Let's get into it. The assumption most people carry about themselves and about intelligence in general is that smarter means better equipped to analyze, better equipped to decide, better equipped to navigate complexity, uncertainty, and pressure without the cognitive errors that trip up less capable minds. It is a reasonable assumption. It is also, under certain conditions, precisely wrong. The research literature on this is unambiguous and has been building for decades. In 2012, psychologist Keith Stanovich at the University of Toronto published findings that would become one of the most cited and most unsettling results in cognitive science. Intelligence, as measured by IQ and academic performance, does not protect against cognitive bias. In many domains, it actively amplifies it. Stanovich called the phenomenon dysrationalia, the condition of being highly intelligent and simultaneously highly irrational. And his research demonstrated that it was not only real but systematically underestimated because the people most affected by it were the least likely to recognize it in themselves. The reason is precise. Intelligence at its core is the capacity to construct and manipulate complex reasoning structures, to build arguments, analyze variables, identify patterns, and arrive at conclusions through chains of logic that others cannot follow. Under normal conditions, this capacity is an enormous advantage. Under pressure, when time is compressed, when the stakes are high, when the emotional system is activated alongside the cognitive one, this same capacity becomes dangerous because the intelligent mind does not stop reasoning under pressure. It reasons faster, it reasons harder, it constructs justifications for the conclusion it has already intuitively reached, and it does so with such sophistication that the justification is nearly impossible to distinguish from genuine analysis. The intelligent person under pressure is not thinking less carefully than usual. They are thinking more carefully in completely the wrong direction, and their intelligence is making them more certain they are right. To understand why this happens, we need to understand what pressure actually does to the brain. When the brain perceives high stakes, when a decision feels consequential, time-limited, or threatening, the amygdala activates. The stress response system comes online. Cortisol and adrenaline enter the bloodstream. This is the same response the brain produces when facing a physical threat. It evolved for a world where high-stakes situations required fast physical responses, not nuanced multivariable analysis. And here is where the problem begins. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational deliberation, long-term planning, and the kind of sophisticated reasoning that high intelligence is built upon, is directly suppressed by elevated cortisol. The higher the pressure, the more the cortisol, the less the prefrontal cortex is able to operate at full capacity. In a person of average intelligence, this suppression produces a relatively modest degradation in reasoning quality. The person becomes somewhat more reactive, somewhat less analytical. The shift is noticeable but not catastrophic. In a highly intelligent person, the same suppression produces a different and more dangerous outcome. Because the intelligent person has spent their entire life trusting the output of their own cognitive system, their track record of being right, of arriving at correct conclusions through their own reasoning, is extensive and reinforced. They have enormous confidence in the quality of their own analysis. When the prefrontal cortex is suppressed by pressure, when the reasoning system is no longer operating at the standard it usually operates at, the intelligent person does not know this. They feel as if they are reasoning clearly. They feel as if the conclusion they are reaching is the product of the same analytical process that has served them so well across 20 years of being the smartest person in the room. What they are actually producing is a sophisticated, highly articulate, internally coherent, and fundamentally compromised justification for whatever the emotional brain has already decided. In strengths, the intelligence is not protecting the decision, it is decorating it. There are three specific cognitive patterns that high intelligence makes worse under pressure. Understanding all three is the difference between recognizing this mechanism in yourself and remaining unaware of it. The first is overcomplexity. When a highly intelligent person faces a decision under pressure, they are capable of identifying a far larger number of variables than a person of average intelligence. More potential outcomes, more interdependencies, more second and third order consequences. Under normal conditions, with adequate time, this complexity is an advantage. Under pressure, with time compressed and cognitive resources partially suppressed, the same complexity becomes paralyzing. The intelligent person cannot reduce the problem to its essential elements because their brain will not let them simplify. Every simplification feels like a dangerous omission. The decision takes longer, the analysis circles, the window for action narrows, and when the decision is finally forced, it is made not from clarity but from cognitive exhaustion, not from analysis, from the relief of being finished analyzing. The second pattern is motivated reasoning. Motivated reasoning is the brain's tendency to work backward, to begin with a conclusion it finds emotionally preferable and construct the reasoning that supports it after the fact. Every human brain does this, but the intelligent brain does it better. A person of average intelligence constructing a motivated argument will produce a justification that is recognizable as thin, that can be challenged with a few pointed questions and a basic grasp of the relevant facts. A highly intelligent person constructing a motivated argument will produce something that is sophisticated, internally coherent, and capable of withstanding serious scrutiny, even when the conclusion it is defending is completely wrong. This is why highly intelligent people in high-pressure situations are significantly more difficult to talk out of bad decisions than people of average intelligence. It is not because they know more. It is because their wrong answer sounds more right, and they have constructed it well enough that even they cannot see the seam between the reasoning and the rationalizing. The third pattern is confidence calibration failure. Decades of being reliably right produces, in highly intelligent people, a calibration of confidence to outcome that has worked consistently over time. They have learned, correctly, that when they feel confident in a conclusion, the conclusion is usually correct. Under pressure, when the cognitive system is compromised and the reasoning is less reliable than usual, the confidence signal does not adjust accordingly. The intelligent person feels just as certain as they always do, possibly more certain, because the motivated reasoning system has constructed a particularly compelling justification, and the internal experience of that justification is indistinguishable from the experience of being genuinely correct. The confidence that has served as a reliable indicator for 20 years is now a false signal, but it doesn't feel false. It feels like clarity. And that feeling of absolute clarity in a moment of maximum cognitive compromise is the most dangerous state a highly intelligent person can occupy. These three patterns, overcomplexity, motivated reasoning, and confidence calibration failure, do not operate in isolation. Under real pressure, they operate simultaneously, they compound each other, and they produce a specific, recognizable failure mode that appears again and again in the histories of highly intelligent people who made catastrophically wrong decisions at critical moments. The corporate executive who analyzed a failing strategy to death and committed more resources to it rather than cutting losses, not because they were stupid, but because their intelligence constructed a compelling case for staying the course that their emotional investment in the strategy required. The physician who pursued a complex diagnosis at the expense of a simpler and correct one, not because they lacked knowledge, but because the complexity of their own reasoning had made the simple answer feel insufficient. The brilliant lawyer who argued their client into a worse outcome than a settlement would have produced, not because they didn't understand the risk, but because they had constructed an airtight internal case for why the risk was worth taking. In every instance, the intelligence was not absent, it was fully engaged. It was engaged in producing the most sophisticated possible justification for the wrong decision. There is a detail in these cases that is worth examining specifically. In almost none of them was the intelligent person unaware that pressure was present. They knew the stakes were high. They knew time was compressed. They knew this was an important decision. What they did not know, what the cognitive system under pressure made it nearly impossible to know, was that their awareness of the pressure was not protecting their reasoning from it. Knowing that you are under pressure does not immunize you from the neurological effects of being under pressure. This is perhaps the most important and most counterintuitive finding in the entire literature on high-stakes decision-making. The intelligent person who says to themselves, "I know I am under pressure, I need to be careful," is doing something valuable. But the awareness itself does not restore the prefrontal cortex's suppressed function. The cortisol is still present. The amygdala is still engaged. The motivated reasoning system is still running. The awareness is a warning that is being processed by a system that is already compromised. There is a phrase that appears in the research on this phenomenon that I want to spend a moment on. It is called the intelligence trap. In Sapuradur. The intelligence trap describes the specific condition where the cognitive tools that produce superior outcomes under normal conditions become the mechanism of failure under high-pressure ones. The same pattern recognition that identifies solutions others miss, under pressure, begins pattern matching prematurely, closing off options before they have been adequately evaluated. The same capacity for complex reasoning that builds elegant multivariable analyses, under pressure, builds equally elegant justifications for conclusions the emotional brain has already reached. The same confidence that has been calibrated over years of being correct, under pressure, fires on the same schedule regardless of whether the conditions that made it reliable are still present. Every strength becomes a liability, not despite the intelligence, because of it. And here is the detail that makes the intelligence trap particularly difficult to escape. The smarter you are, the harder it is to recognize when you are inside it. Because the intelligence trap is, by definition, invisible from the inside. The person inside it is experiencing what feels like clear thinking, what feels like their best analysis, what feels like the kind of confident, well-reasoned conclusion that has been right before and will be right now. The signal that would tell them something is wrong, the feeling of uncertainty, the recognition of cognitive compromise, the awareness that their reasoning is less reliable than usual, is exactly what the intelligence trap suppresses. They cannot feel their way out of it because the trap has disabled the feeling. They cannot think their way out of it because the intelligence is what is keeping them in. The research on this is not without hope, but the hope is specific, and it requires something that highly intelligent people find genuinely difficult. The first and most important protective factor is pre-commitment. Pre-commitment means establishing decision rules before the pressure arrives, before the stakes are elevated, before the amygdala is engaged and the cortisol is present and the motivated reasoning system is running at full speed. The intelligent person who decides in advance, if these specific conditions are met, I will take this action, has created a cognitive anchor that exists outside the pressure system. When the high-pressure moment arrives, the pre-committed rule does not need to be reasoned through. It only needs to be recognized and applied. And recognition, pattern matching against a pre-established criterion, is far less vulnerable to pressure-induced degradation than real-time, complex analysis. This is why the best high-stakes decision-makers in medicine, aviation, and military command are not necessarily the most intelligent people in those fields. They are the people who have built the most robust pre-commitment systems, who have reduced the number of decisions that need to be made under pressure by making them in advance. The second protective factor is structured dissent. Because the intelligence trap is invisible from the inside, the most reliable way to detect it is from the outside. High-performing teams in high-pressure environments systematically assign someone before a critical decision is made to argue the opposite position, not as a formality, as a genuine cognitive stress test. The intelligent person under pressure who encounters a well-constructed counter-argument faces a specific choice. They can dismiss it, which, if they are inside the intelligence trap, their motivated reasoning system will make very easy and very convincing. Or they can sit with the discomfort of genuine uncertainty, long enough to ask whether the counter-argument has merit they cannot immediately identify. That pause, that deliberate tolerance of uncertainty, is the gap through which the intelligence trap can be escaped. It requires, from someone who has spent 20 years being the smartest person in the room, the willingness to be wrong, not as a performance of humility, as a genuine recognition that the feeling of being right and the fact of being right are, under pressure, two completely different things. Intelligence is not a protection against bad decisions. Under the right conditions, under the specific conditions of high stakes, compressed time, and elevated emotional activation, intelligence becomes a risk factor, not because the intelligent person stops thinking, because they cannot stop. The mind that has always found the answer through more analysis, through more reasoning, more variables, more complexity, does not know how to do less of what has always worked. And under pressure, more is exactly the wrong direction. Understanding this does not make the intelligence trap disappear, but it does mean that the next time you are in a high-pressure decision and you feel the absolute clarity of knowing you are right, you have one question available to you that most people never think to ask. Is this clarity, or is this the intelligence trap running at full speed, pointing confidently in exactly the wrong direction and feeling completely indistinguishable from the real thing? That question alone, asked before you commit, is worth more than 20 years of being the smartest person in the room. If this reframes something you thought you understood about your own mind, that is exactly what this channel is built for. Subscribe to Dr. Cole's Dark Psychology. Every week we go beneath the surface of human behavior, into the neuroscience and psychology of why people do what they do when the stakes are highest, the pressure is greatest, and the mind is doing things they cannot see from the inside. No self-help, no shortcuts, no lists of tips, just the science underneath the behavior. We'll see you in the next one.